Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the children's room.
I'm here for another conversation. This one is about Greek mythology.
One of my favorites.
Yes, I've kind of been putting off Greek mythology. When I did my world tour, I skipped right over Greece, partly because it's the mythology most people know the most about. But also, in a way, I'm saving it for Anne because it's my favorite.
Yes.
So, and it's also like I'm kind of cheating because I've been studying Greek mythology since I was a little kid. I had a class on it in college, in fact. Our textbook was the Robert Graves books on the Greek myths,
Okay.
which are good, although I don't agree with all of Graves' conclusions, though.
Do you have a preferable text?
It depends. Right now, currently, Stephen Fry is doing his version of Greek mythology, which are just completely brilliant.
Okay.
I've only read the first two. He has a third one coming out. He has one mythos about the gods, heroes about the Greek heroes, and then Troy, which is his retelling of the Trojan War, which will be coming out soon. Those are the best. In fact, they're checked out right now, so I don't have examples of them. I have the book on the Greek gods by Rick Riordan of the Percy Jackson fame. Rick Riordan did a lot to popularize Greek mythology. Even without Rick Riordan, teachers still teach a Greek mythology segment every year in school. In fact, I literally had someone come to my desk and ask for a book on Greek mythology while I was researching this. Yes, so maybe this is the time of year that teachers assign them their Greek gods.
Could be.
One of my favorite current retellings is the one over there, the graphic novel version by a guy named George O'Connell. He's in a 12-volume set, one for each of the gods. Extremely well done. All right, so Greek mythology is extremely popular. It's been popular with Western civilization for a long time, partly because ancient Greece was very influential on Western civilization, particularly America. In the Percy Jackson books, you can reach Olympus by going up the Empire State Building.
Right.
Because Zeus has said that America is the closest thing to ancient Greece, because we were built along the ideals of ancient Greece. Among the things that America borrowed from ancient Greece was things like democracy and philosophy, as well as poetry and history. All these things are first developed in the Greek world. We now know that people older than the Greeks had this kind of thing going on. However, they didn't leave as many things behind, and the things they left behind weren't translated until relatively recent times. When I tell the story of Hercules, for a long time Hercules was considered the oldest hero in the world. And now we know Gilgamesh predated him by some time. But when Hercules myth was popularized, no one had heard of Gilgamesh. His stuff just hadn't been translated. So we know more now than we did back a long time ago. But the founding fathers had a real obsession with ancient Greece, which is why so many of our buildings in Washington, D.C. have Greek columns in front of them.
Right.
So Greek myths, very important, very popular. It's also one of those mythologies that have like a complete story with a beginning and a middle and not exactly an end, but it does, you can follow through the courses of these things. For me, it was like discovering a whole new comic book set. Because the characters in these myths, they had crossovers, team-ups, they met each other. Hercules and Theseus would hang out, and then they joined the quest for the Golden Fleece, and and so forth and so on. So it feels like a very completed world when you approach it as a child. So I'll try to do justice to it. Now, one thing to bear in mind is I've always said there are different versions of all these different myths. I say that almost every time.
Yeah.
And Greece, that's twice as true, because Greece wasn't a country when these myths were developed. Greece was a set of city-states.
Right.
You had Athens, you had Sparta, you had Ithaca, and each one of them was different. To the Athenians, Athena was the most important goddess, and she carries much more weight in Athens than anywhere else in ancient Greece. In other parts of the ancient world, she's just barely a blip on the radar.
Right.
So because of this, each city-state had their own version of the myth, some of which are wildly contradictory. So in the last week or so, I've listened to the audiobook of Stephen Fry doing his Greek myths. I've read the Rick Riordan and the George O'Connell, and they're all significantly different. Feel free to flip through that. It's very good. He has a nice style that's realistic without being like too realistic, because he's writing about gods, things that are larger than life.
Right.
So Greek mythology does have a beginning.
Okay.
There's a myth for the creation myth for the universe. In Greek myths, everything began with chaos, and chaos was a kind of formless nothingness. The Greeks, as a people, didn't like chaos. They liked order. They liked the world that made sense to them. So chaos was bad to them. So out of chaos, eventually separated into two parts. It separated into Gaia and eventually Uranus. Gaia was the earth and Uranus was the sky. And if the name Gaia sounds familiar, it's because we still call Mother Earth Gaia.
Right.
And the G in Gaia, it gave us our English words geology and geography.
Cool.
So there was Gaia, the Mother Earth, and Uranus, the sky. And the sky lay across the earth, both figuratively and literally, because it wasn't too long before Gaia was with child. Now, when you read the myths, it's obvious that these are both concepts. Gaia is the earth, but she's also a woman. She has feelings, she has emotions, and she's capable of getting pregnant and giving birth. And she does, in fact, do that. She gives birth to 12 titans. The titans are huge. They are giant creatures whose heads touch the sky, tremendously powerful. They are forces of nature. And much like their mother and father, they are both characters in their own right, and they symbolize things. And there are 6 males and 6 females.
Are they actually meant to represent the forces of nature?
To a certain extent.
Okay.
Like Hyperion was the titan of the sun, and he got one of the female titans pregnant, and she gave birth to the sun in the sky, which is, I'm sure, a very difficult delivery. This is before the internet, of course, so there wasn't a whole lot for the titans to do except get busy with each other. And so the titans are amazingly prolific. Oceanus and Nereus, the female titan, were both responsible for water, got together with each other, and she gave birth to every ocean in the world and a lot of the major rivers.
Okay.
So I'll be grateful for that. So basically, they physically produced out of their own bodies most of the earth.
Interesting.
But everything that Gaia gave birth to wasn't perfect. The titans themselves were physically perfect, tremendously powerful, but she also gave birth to monsters. There were 3 cyclopi who were huge, ugly, had a single eye in the middle of their forehead. And she also gave birth to the Hecatontries, who have 50 heads and 100 hands. They were giants who were covered with heads and hands. Artists trying to draw them their hands full, literally. It's very difficult to even imagine what they looked like. Uranus saw those, and was offended by them, that he couldn't have fathered anything like that. So he destroyed them by burying them in the earth. And since the earth was Gaia, there's a translation of this phrase from ancient Greece in which he returned them to their womb. And if you imagine that he was physically doing that to the woman that he was with, that's a really horrible, horrible thing. Whether it happened physically or symbolically, either way, Gaia was violated. She loved all of her children and couldn't understand what was wrong with Uranus. Mm-hmm. So she decided that it was time for Uranus to go. Mm-hmm. So she went up to the mountains and she forged a weapon, the very first weapon on Earth. And she made it out of adamantine, which, if it sounds familiar, Wolverine's claws are adamantium, which is the modern day version of that.
Cool.
It's Greek for unbreakable.
Okay.
So she made an unbreakable weapon. Now, interestingly, she made a sickle.
Oh.
Which is used for harvesting grain.
Right.
As weapons go, a sword, a knife maybe might have been more convenient, easier to use. A sickle isn't really made to kill people. And I'm sure scholars have spent their whole careers trying to analyze why a sickle was the first thing created in the world, in the whole universe. But for whatever reason, she made a sickle. And then she approached her children, the Titans, and said, all right, who would like to kill their father and rule the universe? It's a pretty broad offer, but the Titans didn't want to. The Titans, for the most part, were content. They were happy with the universe the way it was. Not that they particularly liked Uranus, but at the same time, they didn't want to rock the boat, except for one Titan. Oh. And that was the one called Cronus. And again, if Cronus sounds familiar, he was the Titan of time. So from him we get chronology and chronicle.
Very cool.
The Romans called him Saturn and would later name a planet after him. Now, Cronus was the Titan of time. It was said that until he was born, time literally didn't pass. So whether that was true or not, at least symbolically true. The thing was, the only way you know that time is passing is when things change. So the rest of the Titans represented mountains or oceans, which are for the most part unchanging. But Cronus was the Titan of time, and time is always ticking. It's moving forward. So of all the Titans, only Cronus felt that maybe it was time for a change. So he agreed with Mother Gaia's plan. So going through a complicated process of luring him back to her bed so that Cronus could spring out from hiding and attack his father. And now, he wound up not actually killing Uranus, but he did render it so that there wouldn't be any more Titans born.
He rendered it so.
Yes, he cut off that very, very important part of Uranus.
Okay.
I should have put a trigger warning ahead of this. I totally apologize. I'm so familiar with Greek mythology, I forget that some people aren't. Yes, the story of the gods and the Titans will have murder, mutilation, incest, rape, cannibalism. Yeah, just pretend that came at the front of this thing.
Just all the things.
So having done this deed, this bloody deed, he then hurled away what he had cut off. And his father Uranus cursed him that he would suffer the same fate, that one day his children would betray him. So meanwhile, what he threw away sailed across the earth. And in those days, it was easy to create life, apparently, because every drop of blood that fell became some form of life. There were more nymphs born. From some of the blood came the Furies, who would hunt down anyone who committed a crime, like, patricide. And some of the stuff of life that leaked out of Uranus's organ landed in the water, where it mixed with sea foam of the ocean as the waves were washing up. And that came to life too.
Mermaids?
No. Mermaids had already been created. This was something different. Somehow, something was created that the universe had never seen before. Something new that wasn't a Titan or anything else. And she stepped ashore from the water completely naked, and she was beauty. She wasn't just beautiful, she represented beauty. Everywhere she went, birds flew around and landed on her shoulders. Flowers literally grew under her feet. She will come to the story later. No one even knows she exists at this point. So now Cronus ruled over the universe. So it was the time of the Titans at this point. Some Greek myths refer to this as the Golden Age because everything was great, if you were a Titan. Cronus immediately married his sister Rhea because there wasn't many other people to marry in those days, so everybody married their sisters. But as time passed, and for them this is probably millions of years, Cronus grew to be a despot. His rule was more and more dark and cruel. And he got his sister, wife, Rhea, with child. But as soon as she gave birth, he took the baby and extended his jaw and swallowed it whole. Ate it. Rhea was not happy with this. But he said, look, I can't take any chances. I'm under a curse, so that's how it's going to be. And he kept laying with her, and every time she got with child, he would do the exact same thing. She tried to avoid him, to no avail. He still forced himself upon her. She gave birth to 5 children, and all of them were eaten alive the second they were born. Now, what no one suspected at this point in reality was that when Cronus took over the universe, he became different. The added superpowers had altered him in a way that really couldn't be defined. The children Rhea was giving birth to weren't Titans in a technical sense of the word. Unbeknownst to the Titans, a sort of evolution had occurred, a sort of divine evolution. She was giving birth to the second generation of creation, although they didn't know it at the time. But Rhea definitely knew that she was really tired of this. So, Rhea went to Gaia for assistance. And so Gaia offered pretty much the same advice she'd used last time. You have to get rid of your husband. So even though Gaia had set it up, you may notice this is not the caring, compassionate Mother Earth you may be familiar with. The Greeks understood that Earth could be cruel as well as kind. So Gaia conspires with Rhea to kill Cronus. Mm-hmm. So, which is going to be very tricky. Yeah. So she agrees to lay with him one more time and eventually gets pregnant. She pretends to go into labor. She takes a stone, a magic stone. It's made from a substance known as magnetite. It's so magic, we'll later name magnets after it.
Right.
Also, the mineral magnesium is named after it too, because it's from the part of Greece that the rock comes from. Mm-hmm. She wrapped it up in swaddling clothes, and in George O'Connell's book, she actually sticks little smaller stones on it as eyes. I'm not sure Cronus is paying that much attention to what he swallowed. And she said, "Oh, I've given birth to a boy." And so Cronus immediately grabbed it, popped it down, without even thinking. So meanwhile, she rushes away from him and goes to an island where she gives birth for real. She picked a really great island that was beautiful, full of nymphs, and a she-goat. And when she gave birth, she gave her baby to the she-goat to be suckled. So she decided to call her only surviving child Zeus. Yeah, you've heard that name before.
Okay.
Yep. Now we're starting to get serious. So Zeus grew up in this paradisical island. He was nurtured by fruit and goat's milk. She-goat was magic, so she kept providing him with goat milk as long as he needed it. And when he got old enough, he started cavorting with nymphs, because even in those days, he just could not keep it under control. He was so genial and easygoing. The Romans called him Jupiter or Jove, and we get the word jovial from that.
Right.
That's how easygoing it was. He did have a temper, but in those days, he had nothing to get upset about. As far as he knew, the world was perfect. So his mother visited him as often as possible. Mm-hmm. He visited with his grandmother, and he also visited with Metis, his aunt, who was one of the Titans. And Metis is a female Titan who would try to train Zeus and channel him in his energies in a certain direction that they wanted, mm-hmm. Which was mostly to get rid of his father. Cronus had grown even worse. He had this constant stomach ache and couldn't figure out why. He was getting more and more cranky and more painful. So Metis tried to teach Zeus the proper way of doing things, the right way to bring order to the world.
And he remained a secret.
Yeah, he was a total secret. No one except for Gaia and Rhea knew about him.
Okay.
So, Metis, or sometimes Gaia, depending on the version of the story, mixes up a concoction. Rhea agrees to go back to Cronus again, and once again delay with him. But as they're together, she says, "Oh, and I brought you a new cupbearer. Here's young Zeus." He's described at this point as just having his first beard come in. Now, he was a very attractive child, enormous charisma. So naturally, Cronus liked him right away. And he presented a goblet with this wonderful wine in it, he said. But when Cronus drank it, immediately he had these terrible cramps and he fell to the ground and went into horrible convulsions. And he began to throw up. He vomited up the stone, the magnetite stone that was still in there. The swaddling clothes had all been digested. And then, unexpectedly, to him at least, he also vomited up the other 5 children that his wife had given birth to.
And they were in what state?
They were apparently still okay.
I mean, I don't know that they were ever okay.
Well, yeah. The tragic childhood of the Greek gods, maybe one of the things that affected them later in life. We don't know. It is not for us to judge. They will be a screwed up bunch. So he vomited up children.
Do they come out aged or?
Now, in some versions of the story, they do arrive fully grown. Like they kind of have to if the next part of the story to take place.
Okay.
So theoretically, they grew up and had all their formative years inside their father's stomach.
Okay. All right.
Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon.
Interesting.
Those are names to conjure with, eh?
Okay.
Yeah, this is how they got their start. And as I said, they were the next generation. Possibly they survived all of that. They survived something perhaps that Titan couldn't have survived because they weren't Titans.
Right.
They were the next generation down. They were what the universe would eventually call gods.
Right.
They were the first gods in the universe. They joined with Zeus to make 6, and eventually Aphrodite to make 7.
Okay. Pause.
Yeah.
Qualities when you're comparing Titans to gods.
Okay, now the Titans were, in some ways, the Titans were still forces of nature. They didn't have fully formed personalities.
Okay.
Many people who study folklore say that in each order of creation, they become more and more human until humans are finally created. Gaia and Uranus are more concepts than people. And the Titans also represented forces of nature. I mean, they obviously had their emotions, but they weren't fully formed emotions. However, the gods had what we would call full human emotions. They were less powerful than the Titans for raw strength, but in some ways they were more cunning, and they were more adaptable to a changing world, because the world was rapidly changing around them, which the Titans couldn't cope with. They liked things the way they were. Apart from Cronus, they were all still stuck in status quo. But the gods, the Greek gods, they would love and hate and fight and bleed. They would live robust lives the Titans could never imagine. The Greek gods were like humans, but writ large. All of their foibles, all of their strengths and weaknesses stretched across a huge canvas. So they were the inheritors of the universe. If they could get rid of the most powerful beings ever created, the Titans, who are still out there. And while none of them liked Cronus, none of them really wanted the gods to take over either.
I may have missed something. Why did they have to eliminate them?
Because the Titans ruled the world, and the Titans didn't want the world to change. When the gods arrived, they were something new, something unexpected. They brought about a change in the world the Titans instinctively didn't like. Perhaps they saw that in the world that was coming, there'd be no place for them.
Right. Wow, this is just, it's very symbolic. I love it.
It's one of the reasons why people go back to Greek myths again and again, is you can find all kinds of things in it.
Right.
You've already seen the generational fear, the son supplanting the father. Has already happened twice, and there'll be attempts to happen again. And you can read them as psychology texts. You can read them in so many different ways. And they're also really good stories.
Right, yeah.
Particularly once the gods get on the scene and things start really kicking, which is what we'll cover next time. I know, next time. This is the story of the Titans and how the universe was created. Next time we'll go into the Titanomachy, which is the war against the Titans.
That went way too quickly.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
We'll get into the Greek gods and what they were like next time.
All right. I'm loving that along this timeline, I could in fact be the embodiment of a storm.
Yeah. Yeah, the Titans gave birth to things that were physical things in our world.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Good opening?
Oh, yeah.
So if you know about Greek myths, but that was still something that was surprising to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even though people study Greek myths all the time, the full scope of it is often left out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so until next time, I have been Ed.
And Solitaire.
We'll see you until then. Be safe.